West Virginia University Center for Excellence in Disabilities, www.cedwvu.org. The Pass for Parents project is funded by the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources, Office of Maternal, Child, and Family Health, Children with Special Health Care Needs program. The Circle of Parents group. If you would like to find out more about the Circle of Parents or the Pass for Parents program, please visit our website. The Circle of Parents discussion for this episode is Advocate for Your Child, with special guest Christina Smith, West Virginia ASTRIVE Program Director. Your host is Erica Hastings, and your special guest, Christina Smith. Introduction and information about the ASTRIVE Advocacy Program.
Hello, my name is Erica Hastings. I'm with the WVU Center for Excellence in Disabilities. I'm a parent and family network specialist. At 2 o'clock on Wednesdays, I host a Circle of Parent Support Group. And today I have with me Christina Smith from ASTRIVE Advocacy. Christina, would you like to tell us all about ASTRIVE, why you created it and how you created it?
I sure would. So, hello everyone, and Erica, thank you so much for having me. If anyone out there in internet world has ever been to any training, you will know that I absolutely love to talk about how we can support families and students with disabilities, and focus really on some key areas that include special education, home and community-based services, inclusion in the community, employment, integrated and meaningful employment, and then just being able to provide supports and resources and trainings to allow those individuals and their loved ones to be included and valued and a true part of the community so that they can live a long and meaningful and productive life. So that's kind of the mission of ASTRIVE. I have been involved in disability services and advocacy services for the past 20 years. So I not only do these trainings and have these conversations as a professional, but I also do it from a personal perspective because I have a daughter. I have two daughters. One is 20 years old, and my youngest daughter, who is 18, actually was born with a developmental disability. She has Down syndrome. Her name is Anna. And so I've lived it as a parent as well for all of these years and have had to learn how to navigate all of the systems that folks with disabilities and family members who have loved ones with disabilities have to navigate. So I think that combination of personal experience and personal involvement combined with having run a nonprofit agency for 17 years actually has allowed me to, be supportive and provide supports to families across the state of West Virginia. So back to your question about how did ASTRIVE get started. A couple of years ago, I decided that my passion for actually providing training and one-on-one advocacy with families and helping them be successful at the things that they need to know to help their loved one or to help themselves be self-advocates. That I really wanted to, it was time for me after all of those years to be able to carve out those pieces. And my husband retired also. So it kind of allowed me to be able to open a business and work from home and still do the two key pieces of advocacy that I absolutely love and feel are so necessary. So that's how we got to ASTRIVE. I carved out those pieces and opened a business. Originally it was an LLC, and just recently over the past several months have been able to convert that over into a corporation, and I'm waiting on my nonprofit 501c3 application to be approved, and we'll be able to move forward with moving forward with nonprofit activities. So that's kind of me and ASTRIVE in a nutshell.
That's awesome. And congratulations on
Thank
that.
you.
It's
I'm thrilled.
not easy. So
Very excited.
congratulations.
Thanks.
So I know you said all people in West Virginia. So is that your service area? Do you have certain counties in West Virginia that you will work with a little bit more closely?
I do not. I do not have a service area. I am not one that can ever say no to anyone. And that's a good thing and a bad thing sometimes. But I know that the needs of families and individuals with disabilities truly vary, and it varies. It varies from county to county, and actually within those counties, it varies from region to region or school to school. So, um, actually had a legislator ask me one time. He was considering having a family member move back home, and he asked the question, if I had to pick one county in West Virginia that would be the best for special education, where would I want my family to live? And I said, unfortunately, it's difficult to even boil it down to a county, because so many of those issues are, and the mindset is based on the leaders of the schools, or within the schools, it may be within a classroom, the mindset of the teacher within that classroom. So it really is very difficult to nail it down, in answer to his question, to a county. So that being said, there are families all across the state of West Virginia with varying levels of need and concerns. And so I will work with any family in any county throughout the state of West Virginia. And in Washington County, I've done a lot of trainings across the state, and across the border in Ohio and some other states. So I really don't have a target area that I would, say keeps me from being able to serve families.
Issues due to COVID-19.
Well, I know you've been doing this for a long time, so you definitely are very aware of some of the problems that people were seeing in IEPs and getting modifications for the school and stuff like that before COVID. So while we're
Two different worlds. Yes.
while we are trying to get through the COVID experience, which is so lovely. So, what kind of issues or problems have you been seeing, or experiences that families have maybe come to you about, or maybe that you've just heard about? If you can go through a few of those with us.
I can. So I would say that overwhelmingly, one of the biggest concerns for families who have students who receive special education services would be the appropriateness of how the IEP is written, and focusing specifically on two areas. The present level, or what we refer to as the PLEP, the present level of academic performance, and then, of course, the goals are tremendously, obviously very important, but without that present level written, to describe in detail with appropriate information included in that, it's almost impossible to write an appropriate goal. But those two things being said, I want to flip on over to the end of the IEP, where we would get to when we're talking about placement and accommodations and modifications and appropriate strategies. And I will tell you that one of the most consistent, alarming issues that we see is the fact that I could go into a school and could pull IEPs and look at that services page, and they would literally have the same thing. Maybe the minutes down in the, as far as the special education minutes and services, would be different based on what the child would need and what they may have been found eligible for. But at the top, where it talks about the modifications or accommodations or specific strategies that should be individualized for the child, they are like cookie cutter. Extended time on test, preferential seating, go to a calming room, or a specified location in the school to calm down. I mean, those very specific bullet points that we see in so many. And I'm not saying that those are not very important for many children, but there are, when I leave an IEP, if I have attended with a family, well, many times though there are 25 accommodations and strategies because it's very much individualized, and that is definitely one of the frustrations. That and assistive technology, or the lack thereof of appropriate training and appropriate access to assistive technology that would benefit a child. So I would say that's one category which we can talk about more detail in a few minutes if you want to, Erica. But the second alarming, and I say alarming, and that's not even a strong enough word for it, is the trend that we see for kids who have characteristics that result in behavioral characteristics being suspended, not appropriate behavior plans, positive behavior plans, no functional behavior analysis. It's alarming to me the number of children who are suspended, in-house suspension, in-school suspension, or out-of-school suspension, or are eventually expelled. And they have IEPs and they have diagnoses that have common behavioral characteristics, and those are not being addressed or dealt with appropriately. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. And one is lack of training of teachers and special ed teachers and behavior specialists, and the fact that principals and other administrators are, and we believe are being told from the top down, because some of the answers are so similar, that, if a student's action violates the Safe Schools Act, then you can suspend or expel, and that they believe that trumps the IEP process, which we do not believe, because if everything has not been tried, data driven, documented, and if something didn't work, another plan put into place to come up with a solution, then that child should never be suspended in school or out of school, or and that's really difficult. That's one of the most concerning trends, because we refer many times the school to prison pipeline, and we see that, and that's even a national concern, that there's so many kids with these diagnoses, and let's face it, with the increase of the substance abuse disorders and substance use disorders, and children who are being removed from homes, and parents, and put into the foster care system, and prenatal exposure to many types of drugs. There are so many concerns that are out of the control of the child, but we have to keep them safe, and we have to keep others safe, and we have to make sure that their educational needs are being met, and they are just not in so many instances. So I'd say those two, if I had to divide it into categories, those two would be the biggest. Those two are the ones that I receive the most calls about and requests for advocacy, are those two, and that's pre-COVID. Post-COVID, it would be, how do we do this virtually, and my child's not receiving what they need to be, and we can talk about that a little more.
Functional behavior assessments and plans.
Okay, so when you're talking about FBAs, and if that's not being followed, so what kind of advice would you give to those parents who say, like, okay, we have an FBA, this is supposed to be what's happening, it's not what's happening, where should I go from here, what steps do I need to take?
Okay, so there's so if a family, so an FBA is the functional behavior analysis, and that would be the assessment that's actually done if a student has exhibited behavioral characteristics, before, and they have never had any assessments done on that, then a request needs to be made. But I want to back up, because I just, when you said that, I just thought of something else critically important. I cannot tell you the number of at the very front of the IEP, where it's called the considerations page. The considerations page is that page where it says, does your child have a behavior that impedes himself or others? Is your child uh, uh, need communication? Does your child require special education? It's that page where it has the check marks, yes or no, down the right hand side. So I cannot tell you, does your child need assistive technology? Yes or no. I cannot tell you the number of IEPs. I mean, I couldn't even count them because it's so many and it is so common to have first of all, two scenarios. Either have a child who has been suspended repeatedly or in trouble repeatedly, or I mean, I'm not going to lie to say that I haven't even heard of a child who was expelled and that was still marked no. If your child has an IEP and behavior is being, and they are punishing or providing alternative settings or secluding or restraining, or which I hope they're not doing, but it happens across the state and across this country, or they have been suspended and that is marked no, then that's a violation, because they should have, the school and the team should have identified that behavior is an issue that's impeding the education of himself or others. So I would check that number, check into that and ask why that's not marked. The second scenario, though, is that you will have it marked yes, because that child is, there's obviously an issue, and that child is continually in trouble in a classroom or in the school, and so they've marked it yes, but there is not a reference to, depending on the severity. You wouldn't always do an FBA for you wouldn't want to do a full-blown functional behavior analysis for if other strategies have not been tried before. But that's a situation that's a very individualized basis, because we see kids all the time who have a very simple behavior plan for and I use the word behaviors, characteristics that are not significant, but they do impede the learning of themselves or others. And they may not require a full functional behavior assessment, but they still must, if it's marked yes, then they still have to have some kind of strategy to address that. And there should be some kind of data being collected. And that's the other piece. We see so many times that data is not collected, and data can be your friend as a parent, because you can walk into a meeting and you can say, show me the data. You can't make a decision on a plan for my child if you can't show me the data that you're keeping on his goals, on the strategies, because we don't know what's working and what's not. If it's not on paper, if it's not in writing, it did not happen. So they should be able to provide you with their check sheets or their observations or whatever to prove that what they're saying in that IEP is accurate. So, again, it's individualized, but you can't, if your child has an IEP and they are being suspended and in school or out of school, or you're getting notes home every single day with sad faces, or they're not getting stars, or which this is a whole other issue, they're being told they can't go on a field trip, or they didn't get to go to the special celebration for kids that didn't have any occurrences in school, then you need to call a meeting immediately and come up with strategies and ask what they have done and what is working and what is not, and why you weren't contacted to change the plan. I know that's kind of all over the place, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that some of the families I know that I have dealt with, that it's almost like the school wants them to come up with what they should be doing, instead of the school offering ideas of what should be done. And parents are saying, like, I'm not the specialist, like, I not really sure what should be done. This is what I do at home, not having these behaviors at home. So,
So to that point, let me make another. There's another suggestion that I have that I tell parents about, and a lot of parents don't realize this. As part of the present level or the PLEP, which I had referred to, that's all of those paragraphs at the beginning of the IEP where it talks about the level that your child is at as far as academically, and then what helps them be successful or not, and then it gives the grade level considerations that they have to meet. So that's the present level. And I've gone into meetings before and seen a present level that was literally a half a page, which is absolutely not acceptable, because you want that present level of that IEP to somebody who does not know your child or has never met your child to be able to pick that present level up and be able to have some idea of the ways that what your child needs to be successful. And it's a critically important piece of the IEP. So there is a section that parents can contribute to called the parental input section. And I'm here to tell you that your parental input, if you write 4 pages and it describes your child and the stuff that you find necessary for the school system to know about your child, and you ask that it be submitted in the parental input section of the present level, then they must include that as part of the child's IEP. And if they don't and they refuse, then that's a whole other level of violation, and we could file a complaint on that. But that is a perfect opportunity for you as a parent to explain what works and what doesn't. And the thing that's so important about that is, if you have documented what you have told the school and the suggestions that you have made, then if they refuse to do them or try them or consider them, then that's another potential violation, because they have not considered the parents' requests.
And I know parents,
I mean,
like, put your input in. That's why you're there. That's one of the reasons why you're there too. You're part of the team. So definitely put your input in.
right.
And if there's no behaviors at home and there are certain things that you're doing at home,
Right.
that's why the child's not exhibiting the behaviors, definitely let them know. It just might be tweaked to fit a school situation.
Right.
They are not going to be able to do maybe the exact same thing, because there's a difference between being at home and being at school.
Right.
But, a lot of our, discipline things, what you do at home, you can also relate that somewhere to being at the school. So
Right. And I think
hopefully they would take that and work with it.
I think too, a really important piece of that scenario is focusing on triggers. And for those who don't understand what that word may mean, I know you do and I do, but a trigger is something that will, for some individuals who have aggressive behavior or truly can spiral into aggression, many times individuals with autism or oppositional defiant disorder, or there's many types of diagnosis that may have a person realize that there's a trigger, and sometimes those triggers can be identified. We work very, very hard to identify those triggers, and other times the triggers are very elusive, but it takes some work to drill down to what those triggers are. One of the things that we do see a lot in IEPs, the parents can say, this is what triggers my child. Maybe it's a sensory integration issue or a sensory overstimulation or non-stimulation. Maybe it's loud noises. Maybe it's the way a question is asked or a directive is given or a certain word is used or the color of paint on a wall. I mean, there are so many variations of that. And if you know that is absolute, it's been established, and the school knows that, and they still refuse to address those triggers or acknowledge them, then that's a whole other situation. So those are some pieces that are very important to that. Now, let's go back to the situation where those triggers may be very elusive and you can't figure out what they are. That's a functional behavior analysis needs to always be done, and this is federal law, and policy 2419 is West Virginia special ed law, and IDEA is federal law. I can't tell you the number of times I have been in meetings where I have a person who is completely untrained, has never truly, is not the expert in that field, has never been received the appropriate training on how to conduct an FBA, and they are doing an FBA when it's not really accurate and it's not legitimate. So you can request additional assessments at any time. It does not have to be at your annual IEP meeting. If you see that a child, whether it's speech or OT or PT or developmental, whatever it is, behavioral, you can request assessments at any time. And those assessments have to be done every 3 years to determine eligibility and reestablish eligibility. But if your child is not has not exhibited behaviors, then all of a sudden these behaviors become apparent and they're getting in trouble for them or whatever. You can ask for and put it in writing, because that putting it in writing and signing your name and putting a date on that paper triggers, no pun intended, starts that timeline of what time frame they have to have that completed. And it needs to be completed by someone who is certified to actually do it and is competent to be able to provide the answers and what the results of those mean. So those are some other pieces to individualized education plans that a lot of folks don't know. But you can, as a parent or a teacher, can request that they be done, but the parent has to give permission. They cannot do an FBA on your child, full FBA, which has very specific components. They cannot do that on your child without your permission. So the behavior piece is a critical piece. So, and one more thing, I could go on for days on the whole behavior plan. Can you tell that? Behavior plans, the data must be collected, and a behavior plan is a team decision. So that means you are part of that team. A teacher and a special ed teacher and a principal can't come up with a behavior plan and implement it and say that it's put in place without your involvement in that. And I would also suggest, because I've seen this done many times too, I would also suggest that if a behavior plan, it's determined that one is needed, a positive behavior plan, one is needed, whether an FBA assessment was done or not, that all members of the team come together to develop that plan. Because physical therapists and occupational therapists and speech therapists and adaptive PE and many of those related services see things or can provide input to triggers or to strategies that work well or movements that work. There are so many factors that if they are seated at the table when that behavior plan is being developed, then they have equal say in what they believe should go into that behavior plan. And that, I think, is that is something that does not happen consistently across the board, for our students. And it's a very, very important piece, I believe, in the development of that plan. And there should be signatures and a date. And if your child has a behavior plan in the 8th grade, it most definitely should not be the same behavior plan with just some initials signing it when they're in the 10th or 12th grade. Because if nothing has changed, then that student has not been supported in the manner that they should have been supported. Does that make sense?
Yes, especially saying it that way about it shouldn't be the same one, because if that behavioral plan is working
exactly
the way it should be, then you wouldn't need all of that. You know what I mean? Like, things would definitely change because it would progressively change when the child's responding to things differently now. If that plan has been in place for, I would say, even the first, 6 months or 6 months, like, the behaviors will change. And I suggested to a client before, like if the child was having behaviors in class, I was like, well, you know, ask the teacher what happened before like that happened,
Right.
and kind of keep track of like what's happening before, how long is the behavior lasting, what's happening afterwards, to try to figure out like what's going on. Maybe something's happening beforehand that's, like you
Mhm.
said, triggering that
Mhm.
type of that behavior from happening. And if everybody's aware, like especially in the schools, like if it's happening in different classes, if everybody's looking for that, they can figure out what that trigger is.
Right. And Erica, that's a very, very good point, because the consistency across the school and across all settings, we see that that doesn't happen either. And to me, it's just common sense. You can't hold a child accountable for a behavior in the lunchroom if the behavior plan that was very detailed and written, hopefully beautifully, in is sitting in the special education room, and the folks in the lunchroom don't know about that behavior plan. And I'm telling you, it happens. We will see plans that are written and they're never shared with anyone. And so, the child leaves the classroom, hopefully is included in general ed classes at some point, and they go to a science class. And I should have said at the beginning, there are fantastic teachers and fantastic administrators. So this conversation, I don't want you to think that it's, across the board all teachers are bad
Oh
or
no,
all
I know.
administrators are. And I have family members who are both administrators and special ed teachers and gen ed teachers. So I should have said that at the beginning. But to me, it's common sense. You have got there has got to be, in order for that child to be successful and to learn the strategies that work for them, they have to be implemented across all settings. And they can't be punished for one thing in one classroom when it completely goes against what the behavior plan says. And it's not enforced or implemented across all settings. The other thing too that I need to say, and I can finish behavior with this point if you want me to,
Okay.
unless you want to talk about behavior more, because I could go on. But the other piece that we also see is that a behavior plan is written, and good or bad, good, bad, or ugly, a behavior plan is in place, and you'll have a child that or student that exhibits a behavior. The plan was written to address that behavior. It's one of the behaviors addressed in the plan very specifically. And there's a substitute principal or a I don't know, the same administrator or whatever. And on one day they decide that it's happened too many times, so they're just going to go ahead and suspend and have the parent come in and take them home. Speaking of taking home, you never have to pick up your child ever, and take them away from the school with unless they have been suspended. So if you're constantly being called to come and pick up your child because of behavior or an outburst or aggression or whatever, and they do not give you suspension papers, then you do not have to take your child. And it's so hard for some parents, because they think that's a good thing. But when it comes to following federal law and state law and special education, that's actually helping the school out and not helping you, because on the 10th day, and it can be cumulative, on the 10th day of a suspension for a child with an IEP, it is mandatory that a manifestation meeting be held and the entire team come together to address why the IEP is not working for that child and if it's a part of his disability. So if you don't hold them accountable for those suspensions, even if it's a half day or a quarter of a day, when they all add up, then they can start that process over and can do that to you the entire year long, because they don't have it documented, that they have been suspending based on that child's disability. I was going with another point a minute ago when I jumped over to the suspensions, and I've lost that. But that plan and those documents. Oh, about making sure that everybody is held accountable for that behavior plan, because you can't, outline the strategies and the steps in a behavior plan and say that number one, they're going to get a written, a redirect, and then they're going to get a written warning, and then fourth, they're going to have to go to the principal's office, and then fifth, they'll get a phone call to the parent, and then sixth is suspension. If every one of those steps were not followed in relation to that action that they had and that behavior that they had, and they jumped straight from written warning or redirect to being suspended, then they have followed the plan that is put into place to teach that child strategy. So, and we see that happening a lot. They just, every whip stitch will decide we're done. We're not going to follow those steps. I don't care what's in the plan, straight to suspension. And that's a violation because you can't prove that you tried what was in the plan. So.
Modifications.
So we're going to kind of switch gears and and we're going to go back to talking about some assistive technology and modifications.
Okay.
That's fine. And I kind of want to know what you have heard about parents experiencing difficulties with getting maybe assistive technology or modifications that are supposed to be in the IEP if they're actually doing like the virtual learning. And even with the 2 days, if you've heard anything, because I know a lot of counties have just been going to school for 2 days and the other 3 days are remote learning days. So what kind of things are you hearing from parents?
Okay. So before I talk about what we're hearing, let me just make sure that everyone is aware that there were absolutely 0 states that were given any type of waivers to not have to provide special education to their students. At the beginning, there were some questions about, well, since we're going virtual or since, we're remote, we don't have to implement IEPs as they were written. That is absolutely not true. There were no waivers to any states that gave the states permission to not implement IEPs. So what we have seen, and again, we go back to that whole consistency or lack of consistency, because some schools are doing a beautiful job and some counties are doing a beautiful job. But what we're finding is that the supports are not there, and we know there are teachers that are providing online instruction, but the packets, the modifications to the packets, to the content, to the whether they're sending them home hard copy and mailing them, or whether they are being provided through Schoology or whatever platform so they can be downloaded in a modified format, we are seeing that that's not happening consistently. I will tell you that there have been many things that I have done from a parent perspective that I've just made the modifications myself and sent them back and said, this is the modified work that I had my child do, and if it doesn't meet your expectations, then please let me know what else we can add to this. But this is what I had her do. We should not have to do that as parents. But I also know that we know our children, and sometimes the fight. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that you should not fight, but sometimes as parents, we get so worn down with trying to convince and talk through and make people understand that it's just easier if we do it ourselves and submit it and see where it lands us. And I say that with all due respect to teachers, because I know they do not, this was not what they signed up for, and this is so difficult to navigate so many factors, from IEPs from technology not connecting correctly, and video calls buffering, and some parents not having printers and others not having transportation, and I mean there are so many, and people being sick, so there are so many factors that go into it. Okay, so that was kind of a little soapbox moment of mine. So that's something you can try. If it boils down to the number of questions that your child is supposed to do on a test, and you get a test that doesn't have any marked off, I would say and you can tell them Christina said so. Not that that's going to get you anywhere, but I would say, this is what my child's IEP says. They're only supposed to do half of the numbers, or 50% or 25%. So I took the liberty to modify and had my child do it, and let me know if that works for you. So if that is not an avenue that a parent wants to go down, then calling an IEP meeting, and you have the right to call an IEP meeting at any point. You do not have to wait until the annual IEP meeting. If you put a request in writing to the teacher and administrator and whomever else, then they have only so many days to get back with you to acknowledge that they got your request. And that number is either 5 or 7 days to acknowledge, but they have 21 days to schedule that IEP. And those are some things that need to be addressed. Why are my modifications, why is her modifications not being given to me? Why are these accommodations not being provided? Now, let's talk about accommodations though, and supports, because there are a lot of questions out there about those families whose children require a paraprofessional or one-to-one aid or a classroom aid or whatever. Again, keep in mind, there have been no waivers that allow states to not implement an IEP. So we also have to look at the reality of a pandemic, and do some states have allowed students who receive special education services to go into the school 4 days a week or 5 days a week in some situations. Others have actually found an aide that will go to the home and sit with the family and provide those supports to them in the family's home. It's all over the place. So I guess I would put that question back, and we'll talk about assistive technology specifically here in a second. But I would look at what is needed, desperately needed from a virtual standpoint for your child to be successful. And if it's not in the IEP, then you need to make the school aware and communicate that to them and ask for it to be added to the IEP. And if they refuse, then they need to provide you in writing the reason they're refusing your request. And then see if they can come up with a strategy to provide those. But if not saying anything is not going to get you anywhere, you've got to be able to acknowledge what the need is and request that, and ask questions about why, and always, always, always get that response in writing, because so many times what they respond to you and what they put in writing secures the fact that it's a violation, and you love to have those things in writing via email or whatever. I'm going to show at the end of this, I'm going to show you some resources. There's 2 key resources that I share all the time on my Facebook page and share everywhere and go to, and they acknowledge all of these things and have some checklists for virtual accommodations and modifications to request. And there are so many, depending on the situation with the child, that it's amazing how, when you go back to that services page where I said it all looks like cookie cutter, there are so many opportunities and options for accommodations and modifications and strategies that no child services page should ever look the same. And what might work for one may not work for the other. So I'll give you those resources here at the end. Can we talk about this? Can I talk about assistive technology real quick?
Assistive technologies.
Yes.
Okay, so assistive technology many times is also listed on that services page and throughout the IEP. And I am a huge believer and supporter in assistive technology. I used to work with an agency that actually housed a tech team through the Centers for Excellence in Disabilities and the West Virginia Assistive Technology System. And I absolutely believe in finding technology, high tech or low tech. It doesn't always have to be expensive and doesn't have to be a computer or an iPad. But there are so many variations of assistive technology that can help a student be successful and take away barriers that keep them from learning on the level that other students and their peers learn. And I know that we've got some resources to show you on that as well. But one of the frustrations that I have with the IEP process is kind of, it has two sides. First of all, a parent doesn't know what to ask for if a parent doesn't know it exists and doesn't have the knowledge of assistive technology. And I'm here to tell you, if your child has a need, I guarantee there's some type of assistive technology out there that can help with that, hopefully. But the flip side of that is, in my opinion, there is not the level of training and provision of resources on the school side, because I go into IEPs all the time and things that are so basic that I shouldn't have to be suggesting as an advocate to a team. I would think that the team in that school would know that this is going to help that child, and they would just automatically include it. There is an assistive technology assessment that is part of the IEP. So in that front part of the IEP where it has the check marks, yes, no, my child, qualifies for these things. Does this student need assistive technology? So many times it's marked no, even though in the speech goals they're using an iPad or they're using a switch, the big red switch, or some type of a puffer switch, or some type of a finger grip, or there are so many things that fall under assistive technology, but it's still marked no in the IEP, which means so many times you can't hold them accountable because it's saying that they really don't need it, but they're kind of using it. So that needs to be marked yes. There is a true assistive technology assessment that it used to be done many times by speech therapists who would determine if a child really needed an augmentative communication device. But now I think a lot of occupational therapists are doing the assistive technology evaluations and the true assessment to determine if a child would benefit from assistive technology. And that could be anything from keyboarding to AM FM system to, the range of assistive technology is massive depending on the child's needs. Sometimes it's an app. If you ever have a teacher or an administrator that says your child can't have an iPad or a tablet because they're going to play on it, then you need to call me immediately. I hope that doesn't happen anymore, but we heard that so many times. And those devices, there are strategies we can implement. Your student throws that iPad, it's going to hurt somebody or it's going to break. Well, then that's why we have Velcro, and we can Velcro it to a table. There are so many strategies that can offset, some very, very simple, that can offset anything that they say, to allow your student to be able to access those things so that it can help them. And if one device doesn't work, then they need to come up with another plan and look at another device. And I know we're not getting deep into the law here, but if you go back through and you read assistive technology through 2419 and in IDEA, it's not just a one-time, we're going to try this, if it doesn't work, then we're going to mark no and never revisit it. I am appalled, absolutely appalled. And I just got a call this week and had a conversation in another county in the southern part of the state from a mom whose child is in the 8th grade and is nonverbal, has no verbal communications, has autism, and still has no type of communication device, whether it's a PEX system, or a Dynavox, which you don't use anymore really, or Go Talk, something very simple. And some of those are very inexpensive. And this child's in the 8th grade, has no verbal communication, and they're still not working with him on trying to figure out how he can communicate with people. That's a fundamental component of education. And they tried one thing back when he was in elementary school and it didn't work, so they just decided it wouldn't work for him. That's a sin, in my opinion. So, did I cover assistive technology kind of generally? Were there specifics about, oh, one other thing, if they ever tell you if your child has an assistive device and they say that they can't, they're sending homework home, and this is when you're in school, they're sending homework home that requires that child to be able to write or communicate or whatever, and they tell you that that assistive device can't come with you, that's another violation. They have to provide that even for homework. In this resource we'll show you at the end, there's a whole there is a whole section on the A Day in Our Shoes website that will kind of walk you through scenarios and different options for requesting assistive technology for virtual and some things that you may need. So
I think you covered assistive technology quite well.
4 days a week, school week.
You did mention about the 4 days or 5 days. Some count, West Virginia, I know, is doing 4 days if your child has an IEP.
mm-hmm.
So the parents that you've talked to, are they sending their kids for 4 days if they have they have the IEP? Are they just doing the 2 days? What are you finding is the most popular among parents?
I truly am finding that it's all over the board. There are families that are, from a health perspective, they would love to have their child in the school for the socialization and for the educational components of it, but because of health issues, that is keeping them from being able to send them. From what I'm hearing, the students that are going and the families that are sending their students are thrilled with that option. They are thrilled that they have the opportunity to send their children to school, so they can still be having those IEPs implemented and be receiving that the educational pieces to it. In the instructional time. So they're thrilled. I haven't heard of families who have chosen that option that are unhappy with it at all, really across the state. Some are they're thrilled. Now, I know that there are some issues, concerns, which I would be questioning as a parent, as far as access to transportation. So if transportation is in the IEP as a service and your child requires, a bus that has wheelchair accessibility or whatever to get them to and from, if they tell you they can't, even if it's for a couple of days a week, they can't provide that transportation, and your child's not getting to school because they're not, then you can fight that. So that would be one area that I have heard a couple of things about, but I have not heard any families who were upset about that option, because they're thrilled that their children are being able to receive services.
Because during those other 2 days, they're of course getting that more one-on-one with the teachers when they attend the 4-day school attendance.
Yes, and I will tell you, that's a very good point. I have heard some teachers who have been special education teachers who have liked the setup because they feel that they can be more successful in the classroom with the students that they have, because they have less time. Now, there is a frustration from the teacher perspective that I've heard, because they feel like they've had to cut in half the amount of learning, not the amount of learning, but the lessons, so they don't feel like they can build on the successes of the day before. Because many times with our kiddos and with the students who receive special education, depending on the reason and the diagnosis and their the limitations of that student, they require repetitiveness, and they require that building on a skill, and the regression if they don't receive that for 4 days, and they have to kind of start over the next week. So there are truly some concerns from that implementation of the educational, not only educational, but the related services, the PT and the OT and the speech and things like that, when it's not consistent. And I will tell you the lack of consistency and we talked about this at the beginning, Erica, you and I did before we started recording, the lack of consistency within, among teachers, within schools, within counties is apparent in the calls and when you're watching posts in Facebook groups and they're having this chatter, because we had a family last week whose child was failing, special ed student receiving special ed services, whose has kiddos in an autism classroom, and had an F in the classroom because the teacher was sending home packets for the mom to complete with the students on Fridays, and was actually grading. Now we're talking an autism classroom, elementary school, was actually grading, requiring for a grade all of that work to be returned on Monday that she was providing to that parent on Friday, when she was the students were in the classroom for 4 days with supports, and then this particular mom happened to have 4 kids. So, the work was being counted as zeros on Friday, but mom wasn't equipped to be able to teach like an autism teacher or an autism mentor would be able to support. And to me, that is just egregious. They should not be requiring, because those minutes can't be counted towards IEP, because mom is not a special education teacher. So if you find yourself in a situation like that where they are sending home work and requiring you to help your child complete it when you don't have the skills to complete it from a disability, a disability diagnosis perspective, then you need to let someone know, call one of us and we can help walk you through that. I would hope that is an isolated incident and that's not common, but we've heard some concerns about, I don't know how to teach my child on those off days. I can't be the care provider and also be the teacher and modify the work, and I don't have the tools at home to be able to do that. So there is a frustration level, I think, that's fairly consistent across the board on that one. So have you heard that as well?
Yeah, and honestly, like, even with families that I know that don't have children in special education, they don't have IEPs, but they're using Schoology and they're only going online, and the teacher is just checking attendance, and then they're told they can log off, and then the parent is left there like trying to teach their child, and they have been finding it very difficult to do that. And
that absolutely should not be happening. And if that is happening, then they need, I'm all about data and all about documentation, and it could be scribbled on a note on the back of an envelope. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be pretty, but those need to be documented, and folks need to be held accountable, because that's not. I will tell you that there's one app that Anna uses that we've used with her for years, and it's called Math Away. And I'm telling you, if you have access to that app, if you special education or non-special education, the Math Away app, it is amazing, and it has helped get us through math. And I have a degree and kind of excelled in math and loved math, but I'm here to tell you that the way math is done these days, and when you have to write out the steps,
it's that Common Core thing that they do just makes no sense to me.
Exactly. I don't know what they're looking for. So, if you find yourself struggling, then you should not have to be held accountable for the grades of your child. Now, let's be honest. We also have that whole other group of folks who don't hold their children accountable and don't make them get online, and don't try to assist in any way, shape, or form, which we hope that's not happening consistently, but we know it's happening, and that's
Right.
a whole other conversation. But if there is an effort being made, and the parents don't have the skills or the knowledge to be able to assist or here's the bottom line. I live in an area that has very, very, very limited internet. Because of where we live, and we have zero cell phone service. There is no cell coverage that my house belongs to. You can't get it here. And so we also have those other folks that don't have access to the resources that they need. And I don't think that it's appropriate to hold them accountable, even if they can't go sit in a McDonald's parking lot or outside the school and access the internet. There has to be some accountability for making personal plans for some of these students. If that means driving by and dropping stuff off to their house, then a county, I'm not saying a teacher specifically,
Right.
That they are doing double duty and they are working harder right now than many of them have ever worked in their life. And I acknowledge that. I know that. I've seen it personally. But the county, from the county level, and the county being accountable for making sure these students are receiving what they need, there needs to be another conversation about that. So.
And I also feel like in West Virginia alone, you know what I mean? Like there's so many places here where internet is it's just bad. Either you don't, some don't get it at all. And then
Right.
when places you do have it, it's just bad. It's spotty.
Right.
And I feel the same way. Like you should not be able to, hold those people accountable for those issues. And people with multiple children too, like I think what the plan was by the governor was a good plan. Like I'm not criticizing that.
Exactly.
I think it had a really good idea behind it. However, it's also not reasonable to expect parents, especially if there's multiple kids. One kid I think would be hard enough. Multiples would be even harder.
Right.
Go and sit, in the school parking lot or McDonald's or one of the places that they put up for hotspots, to be able to download all that information that they need, and then to go back, upload, re-download, whatever it is that they have to do. It's just not, it's just not a reasonable request. And one reason, especially even here in this county, transportation is is hard for people.
Yeah.
So how are they supposed to even get there to do
Right.
that?
Right. Well, and I wanted to say one more thing too that I just thought of when transportation is part of an IEP. Now, keep in mind, I already addressed that if something is in an IEP, then they have to figure out a way. Either it has to be, and they can't just say, "Oh, we're going to take this out of the IEP so they don't have to do it." I mean, there has to be a reason, but we've seen that happen too. But the other piece too that I don't think I touched on when it comes to technology and virtual is the related services. I know I've said a few things about related services, speech and PT and OT and adaptive PE. We do know some folks who are keeping their students at home because they aren't comfortable sending them in, but they are taking them to like here in Wood County, they may have adaptive PE, so they're being able to go swim at Martin on a certain time in a certain time frame to fulfill those. So I think that some counties are really working hard to individualize that and make sure that some of those really important pieces are being implemented. But if your child has PT, OT, speech, any of those related services in visual, VI, and the county has an amazing new VI teacher here in Wood County. And I know that she's doing her best to get out there and meet the goals and to work with all of these students. She's amazing. But if you haven't heard, if you as a parent or a student have not heard from your PTOT speech and they are not providing any services, they're just not doing it, or they're sending packets home and not having any interaction, you need to call an IEP meeting, or at the very least call the county and call the county, get the name of who you need to address that with, and put it in writing, because eventually If they have not changed the IEP and those minutes exist and they are still in that IEP, then there is a chance your child could get compensatory, which means once school, we're going to pray that school is back in full service at some point. Then any of those things that are in the IEP that are not being provided to your child at the level that they say they're supposed to be provided, minute per minute, then you should be able to file and get compensatory services for that, which means, that may not help someone who is a senior and may not help if they regress so far, but there are ways to still hold people accountable for not implementing those IEPs. And I think that people assume that because it's virtual, they still don't have those options available to them, which is absolutely not true. So.
And speech really is one of those things that definitely can be done in a virtual format. I've talked to
Absolutely
many families who have done speech virtually, and actually a couple of them have told me that their child has progressed so much doing speech virtually that they want it to stay virtual. They didn't even want it to go back to an in-person speech. They wanted it to stay virtually.
Right. Well, and Wood County Society is a nonprofit agency here in the Middle High Valley. And I mean, I know that they work closely with the speech therapist, and they had packets made up, in-home speech therapy packets, and they've done it for a couple of other related services, sensory, I believe. And so those with sensory, I think. Brandon is the person that would need to be contacted about that. But they did a fantastic job of putting together these beautiful packets several months ago at the beginning of the school year, and they sent them home. So even in the downtime, the parents, and it gave instructions and had some activities and had the tools, it had the cards, it had the different activities for the parents, providing them some support and instruction to be able to help their students at home as well. So there are resources out there. It's just being able to tap into those. And know where to go get those. But that's another great resource in our community.
Navigation of needs and resources.
For that. So.
Okay, and finally, I guess, what advice do you have for parents as they continue to navigate the educational needs of their children?
Okay. Boy, that's hard to nail it down. I'm going to give you So, number one, if you do not have a copy of the Parent Advocate Guide that has been developed by the West Virginia Developmental Disabilities Council and the Disability Rights West Virginia, and I know, Erica, you got one when we were in Partners together, Partners in Policy Making, which is a whole other training we could do at some point. But that is a huge resource, and it walks you through section by section, step by step. It provides templates. I am all about providing templates to people because I have lived being that newbie mom, and I am only where I am today because of experience and through attending trainings and through actually having to practice what I've learned, and that's how I can help others. So it is overwhelming and it is intimidating, and my heart breaks for these families when I go into an IEP meeting with them, and I know for a fact, had I not been there, the intimidation by the team would have had a very different effect. I've seen it, and I hate it. I hate it. It shouldn't be that way. But so I would say definitely get that guide. I do have a link to that under my special education page on the ASTRIVE website. So if you don't want to contact them and download a copy, it takes you section by section on the website as well, on my website as well, and theirs too. But that's number one thing I would do. The second thing that I would do is make sure, can I go ahead and share my screen and show these two resources?
Yes. Yeah, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Yeah. So there are two resources that I use and I share and I repost and I send to people. Over the years, when you find some good stuff, you want to share it because it is so user friendly and has such great information. And those two resources are the, are the Center for Parent Information and Resources. You can see the website up there, it's parentcenterhub.org.
Hold on.
This
Okay,
is
there it
actually,
goes.
are you seeing it now?
I am now. Yeah,
See
it took it
Okay.
a minute.
Okay, so this website is what was developed. We here in Wood County and several other counties have what's called a PERC, which is the Parent Education Resource Center. And those are through the Board of Education and the State Board of Education, West Virginia. But this is the National Resource Center for those, and there are fantastic guidelines and guidance documents and things like that on this website. So that's my second favorite website. My absolute first favorite website, and if you have Facebook, I would go out and like this Facebook page. She does amazing webinars and provide you with checklists and resources. And there's an entire section on here It's adayinourshoes.com. Adayinourshoes.com. I cannot tell you how much myself as an advocate and my fellow special education advocates, how much we use this resource. So here's an entire section on pandemic planning, which FAPE and distance learning, because of it's a sign of the times when you have to put an entire special section on COVID, FAPE, and distance learning and what your resources are. This is amazing. When it comes to modifications and accommodations, and you can also find her on Pinterest as well. This website also, does 500 of the most popular accommodations and modifications, where it's divided out by diagnosis or by need for a child. I just cannot tell you how important having this resource in your back pocket is. And then so arming yourself with these, and then underneath the screen up here, I can't see it right now. There it is if you want the down and dirty, and this isn't self-promotion of me, it's just a resource, because like this particular one, when I find things that I know we get a lot of calls about, I try to find a resource and post it on the ASTRIVE advocacy page. So this one happened to be on sensory seeking and sensory. So if you want to, here's about, due process hearings and complaints for COVID issues. So, excuse me, if you want to not have to navigate through all of those and just want some of the very specifics, you can, like ASTRIVE advocacy, and I literally just share resources. So that's what I would do at the very beginning. And after you have that information and you have armed yourself with that, and I'll tell you, you don't have to memorize everything. Knowing where to go find that information, if you don't have a copy of West Virginia Policy 2419, which is our state's guidance document, I would go out to the state Office of Special Education website, Special Programs website, and I would request a copy for yourself so you have it and read it. It's not a fun read, but it's an easy read. And there are some confusing parts, but if you ask questions of, advocates or trainers in the community, we will help walk you through any of that. You need a copy of Policy 2419, and then some very basic, but critically important suggestions. Number one, if it's not in writing, it did not happen. If it's not in writing, it did not happen. If you call your school and you say, I'm concerned about my child's IEP and I want you to schedule an IEP meeting, and you did not put that in writing with your signature, or send it in an email, because you can, an email serves as an appropriate communication tool these days. Print off a copy, stick it in a file. And if you can turn on the read receipts, then do that, and print it off and stick it in a file. But If you are one that has conversations with your teacher in passing when you go pick up your child at the school, and you made mention of the fact that his triggers are not being, recognized, and you're concerned about behaviors, when it comes to the IEP meeting and you say, but I told you, we've talked about this 3 and 4 times and I suggested what to do. If it is not in writing, it didn't happen, and you're back to square one because you cannot provide proof that you had that conversation on May the 5th at 2 o'clock with Teacher Smith. Again, it doesn't have to be fancy, and you may not know in the midst of you advocating for your child that you're ever going to have to move to another level to file a complaint or put something in writing. But if you don't make it a habit at a very young age of keeping notes, then when you need them, and you need them desperately, you're not going to have them.
Mhm.
So I cannot stress that enough. And I will tell you, if you've ever been to one of my trainings, you've heard me preach it. And if you've never been and you do attend, you will hear me preach it and teach it at the beginning and end and middle and everywhere. That documentation is key, and being able to say, I did do this, or, I gave you that request. And if you have to take a letter into the school and drop it off, then make sure you have made another copy for you, and you have whoever receives that, whether it's the secretary or the student intern, stamp it received, and then make you a copy of it so you know who, or ask their name, and when you get to the car, write it down on a piece of paper in your car. So because I guarantee they're not doing it. They're not doing the flip side of that. And if you have that proof, or one other thing, if you do happen to have a conversation with that teacher in the hallway, when you get back to your house, if they're a texter or you're a emailer or whatever, you can send a letter saying, I just want to clarify what we talked about. If I'm not correct in this, please let me know. But this is what I heard. And if you don't hear a response from that teacher or administrator or aide or whomever, then silence is acceptance. That means that if they don't come back and say, that's not what you heard, or that's not what I said, then that's what they said, because you put it in writing to them and you have proof now that that conversation happened. So, I spend a lot of time on that piece, but I cannot tell you how many calls I get. Here's a student that we get clear into their 8th grade year, and they've been having all these issues clear back from 4th grade. And a parent calls me in tears and wants me to help. And I'm like, have you documented any of this before? No, they haven't. And, I understand it's overwhelming, but that is an important piece to get going as early as possible. The other thing is, I still can't believe this is happening today. If you have an IEP meeting and it's in person, you do not leave that room or that school. Do not leave the school without a copy of the IEP that you just completed. Don't do it. It's in the law. It's in IDEA. It's in 2419. They must, I don't care if their copier's broken. I don't care if they have another meeting to get to. I don't care if they have to get back to their classroom. They absolutely must provide you with a copy of that, because when you leave that meeting, the IEP should be in place. There should be no changes whatsoever to that IEP document after the meeting breaks up. Now, there may be some technical issues, like if a date was incorrect, or a little tiny technicality, a page number was wrong, or minutes were calculated incorrectly for some reason. But as far as the guts and the modifications and strategies and the words, the verbiage, words in an IEP can mean the difference between a one-on-one aide that is hired for your student, or an adult supervisor who could be a gym teacher who's passing in the hallway and has eyes on your child. But it still may say adult supervision. That doesn't necessarily mean it's your child's support person. So words are everything. And if one word is removed or changed in an IEP after it leaves that room, and you don't have a copy of what you discussed and what was said, then when you get your final copy at home from the board office with the stamped, this is the final one. And you may be stuck with that one because what you said in the meeting wasn't addressed. But if you have your copy, you can go line by line and say, this was changed and I'm going to file a complaint because this is what we discussed. That happens more than you will ever know. And still, I'll get a parent who said, well, I said, do you have a copy of their IEP? Well, no, they're going to put it in the backpack tomorrow. No. And if
That's
you
a
have people,
huge problem. That is such a huge problem. Like,
oh
it's
my God,
send it to you in the mail. We'll send it home with them. We just
well,
can't provide that right now. Not even notes. They don't even want to give notes. They
oh
don't
no. You leave there with everything.
yeah.
Say, I'll wait. If you have to wait 5 hours, then you don't leave there until, and then the next time, I guarantee they will have it ready for you. The other thing is, if a teacher, I cannot tell you still today how many times I go to an IEP meeting and there's no gen ed teacher, the administrator's not there. An IEP meeting must consist of an administrator, a special education teacher, a general education teacher. If you're, I can talk about general ed, they don't have to stay long term if you allow them to leave, if they ask you, but there must be a general ed teacher in that meeting that knows your child that can talk about how they would, what they would need to be successful in a general ed classroom. Every one of the related services, if your child has speech, PT, OT, adaptive, then they need to be in that room during the meeting or on the phone. And if they are not, and you haven't given them permission to miss, and they haven't contacted you with what they're going to cover in that meeting, you have every right as a parent to say, I'm calling this meeting until the entire team can be there. It's that critically important. Do not let them try to pull that on you. And it happens every day, multiple times a day in every single county in this state, or I'll get a cover sheet and I'll know for a fact that there were only 3 people in that meeting, and miraculously, when the signed copy comes from the county, the final copy, there's signatures on every one of those lines. They weren't in the meeting, they weren't on the phone, but in order for them to be in compliance, they went and got the signatures. It's hard once you've addressed it a few times. It becomes much easier, I'm here to tell you, because I don't even hesitate anymore. I don't have any qualms about saying, we can't hold this meeting. We're not starting until the administrator's here, the gen ed teacher's here, blah blah blah. It's tough, but after you've done it a few times and you know exactly what to say, because you are confident that you know that that's what you're allowed to say, then
It's important for parents to stand their ground.
Easier, yeah. So I think if I had to pick those advocacy issues, those are the ones that I know that I have to repeat over and over and over. And then know your own child and make suggestions and do that parental input section of the IEP. That's come prepared to give them a letter. Those things. And we do full trainings. Obviously we can't do them right now, but it's nice to always be in a room with other parents who are or support folks who are experiencing these same issues, so you can kind of know that you're not in this alone, and you are not. And you have to be your child's advocate. You have to, and then find other advocates who can help you on that journey if you don't get what you're needing and what you believe your child needs. So I think those are the most important things that I would say.
Thank you so much you're always such a wealth of information. And
a lot of years in the field.
So do you have any trainings or anything that you're doing that you want to go ahead and talk about?
I don't. I really don't right now. I will tell you that I was kind of waiting to see where COVID was going to go, because we had planned on starting a series on, I did a special ed one back in the or back in the summer, last summer, or in the fall, whenever that was, before COVID hit. I guess that was last year. Oh my gosh, can you believe it's been this many months? But if things do not change, which honestly I'm not anticipating that they're going to change a whole lot in the next near future, I will start doing some online like this. If we can come up with a location that we can limit the number of people and we can socially distance, then I will consider doing some of those in person once we kind of get through this big wave that we're in, because I love doing them in person. I mean, I've done so many Zoom calls and Zoom trainings, and that's all fine and dandy, but you really learn so much from being able to interact with other people and being in a room with them and sharing stories. And so that's my ultimate goal. One piece of exciting news is that ASTRIVE Advocacy was just awarded their first Developmental Disability Council, DD Council grant. My other agency, I worked with the DD Council for years and years and developed programs and implemented those programs across the state. So I'm thrilled that for those of you who may have older students, it's going to be supported decision making across a lifetime, and that's a whole other area that I didn't talk about at the beginning, but I do a lot of trainings on alternatives to guardianship and what you need to look at, and medical powers of attorney, futures planning. Once a child reaches the age of 18, then they become their own adult, and how can you make sure that your loved one is protected but supported without having to have their rights taken away. And so this supported decision making is recognized across the country, but as a model that you can use in place of guardianship, but it allows the individual with disability to remain their own guardian, but all of the protections and the supports and the help them plan are in place. So I'm going to be implementing this program, developing materials and working with folks across the state. So that is really important. That being said, I mentioned the age of 18, but I am a firm believer in developing those skills in youth in the school system at a young age so that they can build on them. Just because a child reaches the age of 18 doesn't mean they're magically going to know how to advocate for themselves or determine what they want in life. So there are some even junior high, middle schoolish practices that we're going to be working on to help educate students in how they can help direct their life and be a part of the decision making, so that when they reach 18, they have already established those skills and can move forward with it. So I am really over the moon excited about being able to do that. So there will be trainings on that too.
Well, congratulations on that. That sounds really exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I'll keep you posted on trainings, Erica, and you can distribute it to the group if you need to, and
okay,
as they come up. It'll be it'll be second quarter probably.
Okay, awesome.